And once again with us, we have Wisconsin State Legislature 65th Assembly District Representative Todd Ohnstad with us, who has promised to come on from time to time and keep us abreast of the situation in Madison and what the state legislature is doing to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic as well as the economic response. Todd, thank you. Welcome back to the program. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Ralph. And once again, thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Todd. You know, it takes courage to come on a show where you know that the host doesn't necessarily agree with you philosophically on every issue. But I think it's important that we demonstrate how our community isn't about partisanship, but it's about people. And Todd, I think that besides the fact that you and I respect and like each other personally, you're an honest man who cares about our community and is courageous to be willing to answer tough questions.
Well, the most courageous part about this for me is the technology to make sure that I'm actually on. And what a dull world we would be living in if everybody agreed on everything, everything that there is to think about.
Well, people end up agreeing on things later on after the fact. Isn't that how that works? They say history is a lie agreed upon.
Sure.
I did a video earlier this week, and I released some numbers, and I'm going to see if I can find them. All right, here it is. Can you see that chart in front of you, Tom?
I can.
Okay. And here's what I did. I took the most populated counties in Wisconsin: Milwaukee, Brown, Dane, Kenosha, the four most populated. And then I compared them to the most populated counties of other states that don't have a shelter-in-place law in effect right now. And, you know, I know that there's the apples to oranges comparison that we're talking about less populated states. So I wanted to level the playing field that way as much as possible. And some numbers struck me here. I charted them all. And when you look at the chart here, you'll notice that, okay, the first one is Milwaukee County, second is Brown, third is Dane, fourth is Kenosha. And then fourth is Salt Lake County, which is 1.1 million people. Then you have Oklahoma and Tulsa counties, which have between 400,000 and 500,000 people. Utah County, which is about 300,000, all the way down to a county in Wyoming and a county in South Dakota. And what I noticed, with the exception of the outlier in Minnehaha County, South Dakota, which is on the far right side of the screen, what I noticed is on average that the most populated counties in the states that don't have shelter-in-place laws aren't better than what we're seeing in Wisconsin. In fact, in some cases, they're worse. Also last week were the two doctors from Bakersfield, California. I don't know if you saw the video or saw clips of it and the information about how it had gotten removed from YouTube. But these doctors said some things that made sense and would line up with this about how sheltering in place really can have some negative effects on your immune system. And they're going to make it even harder when a second wave comes out, if you come out of that situation and then the virus reignites, that you actually will end up with more deaths than not. And so I'm looking at this, and this makes a lot of sense to me, except for in the Minnehaha County. And one of the most important things I think when you're going to share data is being intellectually honest when you have data that doesn't line up with your theory. And so then you have to either leave the data in there and explain the anomaly or accept the fact that maybe you're possibly wrong. And I think we're all wrong from time to time. But then I found out Minnehaha County, South Dakota is where is right near where the Smithfield plant is, and most of the residents live there. And after the outbreak at the Smithfield plant, they tested everybody there. So you have more positives because they were testing healthy people, same as maybe the article you saw about the prison system in Ohio, where they tested 3,000 people, or the nursing home in Boston, where you have 95% of the people asymptomatic. So with that in mind, is this data that you think is being considered when we're deciding what to do here in Wisconsin?
Well, I know that the governor and the secretary designee, Paul, are certainly analyzing data all day, pretty much every day. And unfortunately, the data that I think you said was the case on Wednesday, where Kenosha was number 4. We have now surpassed Dane County, and we're number 3. And just to show you
about population, we're number 4. I took
okay.
Population. No, we are higher. We're higher here than Dane. You can see our cases per 100,000. We're in the 20s as of Wednesday, and Dane's was 7.63.
Well, let me tell you what the numbers were on Friday, and then I'll compare them to what the numbers are today.
Okay.
On Friday, I gave a report, and on that day, there was 6,854 positive cases in the state.
Okay.
And now, today, reporting out, there was 7,964. We went from 316 deaths to 339. In terms of the Kenosha numbers, last Friday there were 391 reported cases, and now there is 534.
Okay.
We went from 12 deaths to 14 deaths. And you brought up Smithfield, and certainly you can look pretty much all over the country and look at where their meatpacking plants are, and frequently, unfortunately, see a big spike.
Yes.
I saw a segment on TV last week in Iowa County, kind of in the middle of Iowa.
Correct.
And 10% of the population of that county had actually tested positive. Can you imagine 10%?
Yes,
so
tested positive, and that's because they're having widespread testing there.
Well, I certainly don't think that we have 10% in Kenosha. I certainly hope not. We have 20% apparently in the Kenosha County Correctional Facility, and
Right.
I'd like to thank the National Guard for coming in and doing the testing there. And there was also five different people who work in the prison there that had tested positive as well.
But there's some good news with that, Todd, and I think the good news is getting missed. And you said you hope that the Kenosha rate isn't higher. But the good news would be if the rate is higher, that it falls in line with anywhere where you test an entire population instead of just people with symptoms. You're finding that there's 10 times more people that are infected than are presenting symptoms. As a matter of fact, 95% of all people infected when they test an entire population are completely asymptomatic. So when you take the number of, and this chart kind of makes my point with that. What I had to do in order to make this chart work is the blue lines are cases per 10,000 and the red lines are deaths per 100,000. And I had to jump that to deaths per 100 to even get the red lines to show up on the charts because they're so small. And this is with confirmed cases. And this is deaths per 100,000 people living there, not per case. So it's not a case fatality rate. But the case fatality rate is much, much, much lower if there's more people infected than we realize.
Nevertheless, we have gone from, I think that when we talked last week, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the number was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 52, 53. Don't quote me on that. I'm talking about confirmed deaths in the United States. The number of confirmed deaths now has gone past 65,000. So that is
not an insignificant number, and by any stretch of the imagination, that's a lot of. That's a lot. There are a lot of people dying from this.
And I think that some of the time will tell in the next few weeks, where a lot of states, for example, Georgia, that just one of the first states to reopen, one of the last two close up, and one of the first states to reopen. And in fact, if you remember, the governor of Georgia was surprised and announced that he hadn't known at that point, when the data he closed very late, that the majority of people were unsymptomatic, as you suggested.
Correct.
And that was why one of the reasons why he cited as actually closing at that time. So now they're reopening. So I think that some interesting data will be just how big the spike is, and nobody seems to disagree that once you reopen, that you will have a spike. The question is how big, and hopefully it's not big, but I'm afraid that it might be.
But if that's the case, how do you explain like Salt Lake County, Utah, 1.1 million people, significantly more people than Milwaukee, never has had a shelter-in-place law in effect, and yet their cases per 10,000 and are lower, much lower, and their deaths per 100,000 are a little bit lower. Milwaukee at 18.4 and Salt Lake County, Utah at about 15. So how do you explain the anomaly that all of these other Salt Lake, Oklahoma County, Oklahoma, Tulsa County, Oklahoma, Utah County, Utah, all of those are smaller than Milwaukee but bigger than Kenosha? They all have lower or similar case numbers without any of this in place. Do you see that kind of data as being problematic with the theory that keeping everybody home and scared is actually making a difference and saving lives?
I think that you'd have to look at a lot of different things other than what you're just posting there. I think that you'd have to look at how much testing has been done. Wisconsin has actually started to ramp up the amount of testing.
Sure, and that's going to
I
make our
think they're
blue
more
lines
about.
increase. That's going to make our blue lines increase as we ramp up testing, because we're
I
going to
would
start
think so.
testing asymptomatic people. But it's not necessarily going to make our red line increase, because these people already have it now and they're not dying. Testing them isn't going to make them die from it. So we're
Well,
going to have more data on how many people are infected, which is a good thing. I think that's the thing that we've all been missing, and that's a really good thing. But how that data gets interpreted scares me, because if suddenly we report it as a spike in cases when really it's a spike in people we've confirmed have it, that have had it all along and are asymptomatic, are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
no, the governor has always said that what we should be looking at is the percentage of people that we're finding to be positive, a percentage of those people compared to the number of people that we're testing. And the other part of testing that is really, really important in terms of making sure that we actually get a hold of this virus is we need to test and we need to track. We need to make sure that when we find out that somebody's positive, be they at the Kenosha County facility or in Darien, where they had an outbreak at the Bird's Eye factory, or somebody in, wherever we find somebody who's testing positive, we have to make sure we have to go back and figure out who that person has been in contact with.
Sure, you have to do all the contact tracing.
And the contact tracing is significantly ramping up. A couple of weeks ago, the program was kind of put together, and the governor has said that he would like to have 1,000 people in place. I'm not sure what that number is now, of people who are actually tracking all of the people who have been in contact with somebody who is shown to be positive. Those are the people that we have to make sure are actually quarantined.
Correct.
If you've been in contact with somebody, you really need to really stay at home.
I think that's going to be a much more surgical approach.
Yep.
And that is probably the smartest thing that we can do. Until that happens, how do you explain the discrepancies in the death rates between us and states that aren't putting their businesses out of business, though? I guess that's the question that I still really feel that people in this area want to know the answer to. How is it that there are less deaths in states that are similar populations but aren't sheltering in place? Are they doing a better job at testing and contact tracing than we are?
Or maybe no job at testing at all. I'm not sure. There's too many.
Well, but the testing accounts for the blue line.
That we don't know. Too many questions that we don't know in terms of comparing Tulsa to Milwaukee.
Right, and the blue line explains the number of cases, and I get that, but the red line is just straight number of deaths.
There's a lot of data that I would have to look at before I give you an answer to that. Let me just tell you a little bit about one of the committees that I serve on in the state assembly is the State Affairs Committee. And we had an interesting hearing on Thursday where we heard from Wisconsin Manufacturers Corporation and a number of other people, the Restaurant Association, the Tavern League, the Hotel and Lodging Association, the dairy industry, and others. And of course, this was in support of the WMC's Back to Business plan.
Sure.
And everybody wants to get back to business. There's no question about that. And
yes.
There are some things in the WMC plan that make sense in terms of trying to figure out exactly where the problem lies. In terms of different regions in the state. Although we certainly have a pretty good idea that it is expanding. And the bad thing about the virus is it doesn't respect county lines. We know that to be true. I think that the number of counties now I think that there's only 2 that don't have it, but certainly there are
sure.
a lot of counties that have a lot less than what we do.
Sure.
And so they are obviously in favor of a regional approach, and they are also in favor of opening now. And I think that opening now is a little bit premature when looking at the numbers just between Friday and today, both in Kenosha and statewide. It's obvious that we're kind of in the middle of a spike.
I concede the fact. I think everybody concedes the fact that the numbers are growing and we have more cases.
Yep.
What people want to know is, where is there any data whatsoever that tells us that staying at home is actually making a difference when there are areas that aren't doing it that have the same or lower numbers than us? And if we don't have any hard data that proves that what we're doing is working, even though we might not have enough data proves that it isn't working, if we can't prove completely that it isn't working, how long can we go on telling people that they don't have the right to run their businesses or leave their homes or do the things that make us free as individuals? And
Well,
on top of that, another really important question, and I'll let you get to both, and I'll give you some
sure.
time, is scientifically, how can you tell me that it's healthy or that it's acceptable or that it's not unsafe for me to walk into, say, Target or Walmart to buy a pair of pants, but I can't walk into Mike Bjorn's where there probably be a lot less people present in the first place and do the exact same thing? So what we're doing is we're taking corporate America, the people that we all say is evil and we all hate no matter what party we're in, and we're giving them all of our money, and we're putting our mom and pop places out of business with no real hard data. And I think that that's the question that you have to answer. So people like Brett Bjorn, why does he have to stay home and keep his business closed and sacrificed while Walmart keeps theirs open?
Let me just go back to what you had said earlier. Certainly, there are a lot of epidemiologists in the country that say there's no question that's staying in place, staying at home is a lot safer. I could line up a dozen doctors to your dozen doctors and epidemiologists in terms of what they believe to be
But we have
true.
we have a 50 state experiment going on right now that shows different numbers. Why is
And
nobody?
and
Why
the,
does
and the
everybody
gov-
just say, "Well, we don't know the numbers for sure"? Why is nobody zeroing in on those numbers and saying, "Hey, there is some data here that's useful, some data points,"
but
instead of
but
being on
I
one side or the other side of what's becoming a partisan fight?
but Ralph, what obviously is the case that our numbers are going up, and we are in the middle of a spike both in the state and in Kenosha.
But
And
Utah's numbers are not going up. They're not sheltering in place. You see what I'm saying? The fact the numbers are going up, and I concede that, isn't the argument. The argument is sheltering in place changing that curve when you can look at other places like Salt Lake County, which has 1.1 million people, so quite a bit bigger than Milwaukee County even, and yet their numbers aren't going up at the rate that ours are.
I'm not sure exactly what explains that. As I said earlier, I don't know if they've done any testing or what their level of testing has been. There's a lot of data there. There's a lot of
You
data in
can't
that
change
data.
death rate. You can change
The,
testing and numbers of infected. You can't change death rates unless you're asking doctors to call something COVID that isn't, which the Bakersfield doctors certainly in their interviews said was happening to them as well as other doctors. So, but other than that, you really can't manipulate the number of deaths. Testing doesn't change that. So even if we were to assume that we're testing more so we have a higher number, and that would be a good assumption, all right, that doesn't change the fact that they're not losing as many people as we're losing.
Wisconsin is known to have a very um, we're an older state. So first of all, so maybe the demographic is part of it.
That's
We also
that's a fair answer. That's a fair answer.
and we also know that people who are in kind of a cramped area um, are having a lot higher percentage and also higher death rate. True with African
So if you're
Americans
sheltering in place and you live in an apartment complex, you may have been better off going outside.
maybe they're not sheltering in place. I'm not sure of that. Let's go back to the question about businesses.
Yeah,
And certainly, Brett's a good friend of mine. Willie, as we were talking earlier before you opened up with the Oriental
sure.
Inn, and I'm glad to hear that he may be opening up soon. Those are great friends of mine, great businessmen. And I was pleased to see that the governor kind of made some moves in terms of opening up some businesses last week.
Yes.
And I was glad to see that Torcaso shoe store will be opening up tomorrow.
Yes, we're going the right direction from where we were. I can see that. I just hope that we can push
And
a
I'm
little harder.
glad that Common
Business
Grounds
owners.
Coffee Shop, I drove by today and they were serving coffee on the side.
Yep.
So I think that, and also of course the state parks were reopened.
Yep.
So I think that there is a direction, and there's a lot of data that people with a lot more understanding of this whole situation than you or I that are looking at all of these things, and I just got to believe that at the end of the day that we will be a lot better off staying at home as much as we can until this breaks, and we may be very well in the middle of this spike right now. It was initially thought to be sometime in May, late May, so maybe we're in it now, maybe it gets worse, maybe it tapers off. I certainly hope that it begins to taper off. But I got to say that we don't want to, and you really have to thread the needle on this one. We don't, on the one hand, we don't want to open 1 minute too early. And on the other hand, we certainly don't want to open 1 minute later than what we have to. And I think that the governor is moving in the right direction in terms of looking at places that he can do something different, start opening this economy up safely. There was a lot of good ideas at the 7-hour not public hearing, but informational hearing last week in terms of what restaurants think that they can do to make the dining experience safe and sound, what the Tavern League thinks. And I'm sure all of this is going to be taken into consideration as we move towards a safe retail experience.
I know I know you used to be in city government, and you're not in city government now, but obviously
Yep.
you know people who are. What do you
Sure.
think of cities relaxing their walking down the street open container policies so that you maybe can walk up to some of those corner bars in downtown areas at least and grab a cup like this and socialize 6 feet away from your friends with your masks at least over the course of the summer? Do you see something like that being a possibility?
I was in favor of that before the virus, and I'm certainly
Amen.
in favor of it now. And I'm pleased to have been on the city council that actually allow the tables to come outside the taverns, to allow people to enjoy a beer or a cocktail on the outside of a tavern. So I certainly think that that's something that could be looked at. Another thing that the Tavern League asked us to take a look at, and I have since communicated with the governor's office on that, is for areas that have like an outside seating area. Maybe that's the first step. Tavern League thought that would give tavern owners some confidence that we were moving in a direction that would be helpful. So there are a million things on the table. I did talk to the governor's office liaison this weekend about the Tavern League's testimony from last Thursday. And, I'm certainly one that, thinks that small business obviously is the backbone of our economy. And I think that we have to take a good look at, and, thankfully, on the one hand, it's a great thing, the number of Wisconsin businesses that did get the recent set of loans.
Correct.
On the over one.
There's a lot of strings attached to those loans that people don't understand, though.
It is a nightmare. It is a bureaucratic nightmare that they send to us.
One of the restaurateurs told me that they have to keep the same payrolls they had a year ago and pay it all out in payroll. And now they have these employees are home and they're finally starting to get their unemployment check, plus that additional amount that they're getting because of it being COVID related. They're actually making more money at home than they were working. So, we could be causing a bigger problem long term. And that's why obviously we want to get everybody back to work and back to operating their businesses sooner rather than later.
Yep, I couldn't agree more with sooner than later. I just got to say that I'd like to remind everybody once again that I do a COVID report every week. Anybody who wants to sign up to get my e-newsletter, we're concentrating on the COVID right now. Of course, I think this will be the 6th or 7th week in a row that we've done kind of a full report in terms of what's going on in the state. And if I could give you a couple numbers, people can access that by just calling and requesting to be on my e-newsletter list. It's 608-266-0455, or email me at rep.ohnstad, that's OHNSTAD, at legis.wi.gov, G-O-V.
I'll make sure that I put that on the video here and on our
that.
Facebook page and our YouTube channel in the comments. So if you're listening to this on the radio, you can go to getrealwithralph.com and pull up today's episode, or you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Ralph Nudi. You'll see today's interview. You can rewatch it because Todd's an engaging person, and you can get all of this.
It's not worth watching me as a rerun, Ralph.
Oh.
Come on now.
Well, maybe they tuned in and only caught part of it, and they want to catch the exciting back and forth between us. There were fireworks earlier if you didn't hear them.
Oh, that's okay.
In all sincerity, Todd, I know how much you care about the people in southeastern Wisconsin. I care about the people in southeastern Wisconsin.
Of course.
This is a small community, and we're all friends. And I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you being in the hot seat a little bit. And
that's okay.
I know that at the end of the day that you really do care about these people the same as I do. So I can never accuse you of being someone who just doesn't care about the people. I know that you do. And I hope that maybe some of this back and forth can help you to continue to be the voice of reason that I think you've been all along.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate, the opportunity to come on to your show. And let me close the same way I did last week. And that is, we know that this is tough on a lot of people. It's tough not being able to see your friends and your relatives and just the normal life that we've become used to. And a lot of people, deal with that differently than others. So I would just like to leave the crisis hotline number for anybody out there who's having a tough time. Please call 1-800-985-5990. And I got a feeling we'll probably have something to talk about again next week, Ralph.
We will, and hopefully I'll have some updates for you that are pretty good for the community as well. So, Todd,
Okay.
Once again, thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend, and look forward to talking to you again next week.
Okay, take care, Ralph. Thanks again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.